The streets of Los Angeles were quiet early in the morning. The sky was painted with soft orange and pink colors. Keanu Reeves stepped out of his house, holding a cup of coffee. It was time to start his day. Even though he was famous, his life was simple. Every day had a rhythm, and part of that rhythm was seeing the little girl at the bus stop. Each morning, as Keanu drove to work, he passed the same spot. There, a little girl with blonde hair, around 8 years old, waited for her school bus. She carried a Hello Kitty backpack held tightly by her small hands. She had bright eyes and a big smile that made the whole street feel warm. Every day she waved at Keanu and Keanu waved back. Sometimes he just nodded. Other times he smiled. And on some mornings, if the traffic light was red, he rolled down his window and said, "Good morning, kiddo." She always smiled even bigger, like he had made her day. It was just a small moment, but Keanu had come to expect it. And if he was honest, he looked forward to it. But some mornings felt different. Some days the little girl didn't smile as brightly. Sometimes she looked lost in thought. She held onto her backpack straps a little tighter. Her waves were slower, like she was feeling sad. Keanu noticed these things. But what could he do? He was just a stranger driving by. Still, the feeling stayed with him. But today was different. This morning, as Keanu drove past the bus stop, she wasn't there. For the first time since he could remember, the sidewalk was empty. The street, usually full of her happy energy, now felt quiet. Too quiet. Keanu's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He didn't know why, but something inside him whispered, "Something is wrong. Something is very wrong." As he continued driving, his chest felt tight. The silence of the street felt louder than ever. No matter how much he tried to ignore it, the thought stayed in his mind. Where is she? Keanu gripped the wheel as he merged onto the road toward the studio. It was just a normal morning. So why did it feel so wrong? The image of the empty bus stop stayed in his mind. Such a simple thing, yet it made him feel uneasy. For months, the little girl had always been there. Rain or shine. Smiling. Waving. And now, gone. Keanu tried to shake off the bad feeling. Maybe she was sick. Maybe she had a doctor's appointment. Maybe she was just late. But deep down, he didn't believe that. Most people wouldn't have noticed she was missing. Most people wouldn't have thought twice about it. But Keanu noticed. He had spent years paying attention to people, to their energy, to the things that others ignored. And right now, his gut was screaming at him. He pressed his foot harder on the gas, shaking his head. It's none of your business, he told himself. But then he remembered something. Just a few mornings ago, she looked different. Her smile wasn't as bright. Her fingers had fidgeted with her backpack straps. And when Keanu had stopped at the red light, he had rolled down his window. She had waved, but there was a delay. Like she was somewhere else in her mind. Like she wanted to say something. But the light turned green and Keanu had driven off. Now his heart pounded. He had to check. Instead of heading to the studio, Keanu made a sharp turn. He drove back toward the neighborhood. If anyone knew what happened, it would be the old woman who always stood outside her house, sweeping the sidewalk like it was her daily job. Keanu parked his car and stepped out. The old woman looked up, surprised. "Oh, Mr. Reeves, I didn't expect to see you here." Keanu forced a small smile. "Morning. Just had a question." She set her broom aside. "Of course, dear. What is it?" He hesitated. Felt strange to ask. He wasn't family. But something inside him wouldn't let him walk away. The little girl. The one who waits at the bus stop every morning. The old woman's smile faded. Keanu's stomach tightened. Did you see her today?" The old woman shook her head. "No, dear. And that is strange, isn't it? She never misses school." Keanu's jaw tensed. "Do you know her parents?" The woman sighed, crossing her arms. "I see her mother sometimes. Always seems in a rush. Never talks much." Pause. Then more quietly she added, "And I've heard yelling." Keanu's fingers curled into fists. That was exactly what he was afraid of. "Do you think something's wrong?" he asked. The old woman gave him a long, knowing look. "Do you?" Keanu didn't answer. Because deep down he already knew the answer. If he walked away now, he might never know just how bad it was. By the time Keanu Reeves drove back to the street, the sun had started to go down. He should have been at the studio. He should have been reading lines for his next movie. But none of that mattered right now. Because something wasn't right. And the feeling had only gotten worse. As he passed the empty bus stop again, Keanu's eyes moved to the little girl's house. The curtains were shut. The lights were off. The house looked empty, like no one had been there in days. Keanu slowed the car, gripping the wheel tightly. He wasn't a cop. He wasn't family. But something told him to check. He got out of the car and walked to the door. It was silent. Too silent. No TV. No voices. No sounds of life. Keanu knocked. Firm but polite. No answer. He knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. Keanu exhaled sharply and turned to leave. Then, a sound. Soft. Faint. Like a whimper. Or a child's cry. Keanu's entire body tensed. It was coming from inside. He knocked again, harder this time. Hello? Is anyone there? Silence. Then a whisper. So quiet he almost didn't hear it. Help. Keanu's breath caught. It was her. The little girl. She was inside. And she needed help. Keanu's heart pounded. This wasn't just a bad feeling anymore. This was real. Something was happening behind that door. And Keanu wasn't leaving until he found out what. Keanu tried to open the door, but the knob wouldn't turn. It was locked. His jaw tightened and he looked around. The street was empty, too empty. No neighbors were outside. No lights were on in the houses. He hesitated for a second, but then he acted. He stepped back, took a deep breath, and threw his shoulder against the door. It didn't budge. He tried again. Nothing. On the third try there was a loud crack. The lock broke and the door swung open with a long, creaky sound. Inside, the house was dark and quiet. It felt strange, like no one had lived there for a long time. But then Keanu's eyes adjusted to the dim light, and he saw something in the corner. A little girl. She was sitting on the floor, curled up in a ball. Her small body shook as she hugged her knees to her chest. A pink Hello Kitty backpack lay beside her, but the straps were torn. Her blonde hair was messy and her skin looked too pale. She looked up and Keanu felt his heart break. Her blue eyes were red and puffy from crying. There were dried tear marks on her cheeks. And then as soon as she saw him, she ran straight into his arms. Keanu knelt down and caught her. She clung to him, her little arms tight around his neck. Her body was freezing and too light. Something was very, very wrong. Keanu gently pulled back and looked into her sad eyes. Hey, it's okay. I'm here, he said softly. She sobbed into his shoulder. Keanu brushed her hair back. Where's your mom? The little girl's lips quivered. She took a shaky breath and whispered one word. Gone. Keanu's stomach dropped. This wasn't just a bad situation. This was worse. And if he didn't do something fast, he might be the only one who could help her. The little girl was alone. No mother. No one to take care of her. She shivered in his arms, but Keanu realized something else. She wasn't just scared. She was sick. Keanu gently placed his hands on her tiny shoulders. Look at me, kiddo. Her blue eyes flickered up, but she looked weak. Her skin was damp and too warm. Her breathing was short and fast. She had a fever. Keanu didn't hesitate. He picked her up and her arms wrapped weakly around his neck. She barely weighed anything, like she hadn't eaten in a long time. He carried her outside. The evening air was cool, but he held her close to keep her warm. His car was parked across the street. He opened the door and gently placed her in the front seat. He buckled her seatbelt. Her head drooped to the side, her eyelids fluttering. Keanu leaned over. Hey, stay awake for me, okay? She gave the tiniest nod. His jaw clenched. He slammed his foot on the gas pedal. The city lights zipped past as he drove as fast as he could. He kept glancing at her. Her breaths were weak. Her tiny hands lay still in her lap. If he had waited one more day, she might not have made it. When he reached the hospital, he screeched to a stop in front of the emergency entrance. He jumped out, yanked open the door, and scooped her up. Doctors and nurses turned to look. Some recognized him. But Keanu didn't care about that. He only said one thing. She needs help. Now. The doctors rushed forward. They took the little girl from his arms and hurried her inside. The hospital doors swung shut. Keanu stood there breathing hard. His heart pounded in his chest. For the first time he felt something deep inside him. Not just worry. Not just responsibility. Something stronger. Because if her mother never came back, then what? The hospital waiting room was bright and too quiet. Keanu sat in a chair, elbows on his knees, hands clasped together. The little girl had been rushed into the emergency room. He had seen doctors and nurses surrounding her, machines beeping, their voices urgent. Now, all he could do was wait. A nurse walked up to him holding a clipboard. She had kind eyes but looked serious. Mr. Reeves? Keanu stood up right away. Is she okay? The nurse hesitated. She's stable for now. But she was very dehydrated and malnourished. Keanu clenched his fists. He had suspected this. She was too small, too weak. The nurse lowered her voice. We also found bruises, old ones, on her arms and back. Keanu's breath hitched. His stomach sank. This wasn't just neglect. This was something worse. A woman in a dark blazer walked up next. She had a serious look on her face and held up a badge. "My name is Rachel Lawson. I'm from social services. I need to ask you some questions." Keanu nodded. His voice was firm. "Anything you need." Rachel glanced at the papers in her hands. "The child's name is Lily. We've been trying to find her mother, but no luck." Keanu felt his pulse quicken. "No family?" Rachel hesitated. "No known relatives. We're looking into the father, but nothing so far." Keanu ran a hand through his hair. She was alone. Completely alone. Rachel watched him carefully. "Mr. Reeves, do you know how she ended up in that house alone?" Keanu took a deep breath. "No," he said. "But I intend to find out." Keanu walked out of the hospital with a new mission. He needed answers. And he knew exactly where to start. Back in the neighborhood. Keanu drove back to the street where he had found Lily. An old woman was sweeping her sidewalk. She paused when she saw him. Her sharp eyes met his. Keanu walked up. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said kindly. "Do you know anything about the little girl who was in that house?" The old woman gripped her broom tight. She hesitated. Then in a low voice she said, "Yes, and I think I know what happened to her mother." Keanu walked toward the old woman's house. This time she was not surprised to see him. She had been waiting for him. "You found her, didn't you?" she asked. Keanu nodded. "She's in the hospital." She was alone, starving. The old woman's face changed. She put her broom down and let out a big sigh. "I knew something was wrong," she said. Keanu stood still, waiting for her to say more. The old woman looked at him. Her mother. She had problems. "I heard them arguing a lot." Keanu's hands curled into fists. "Did you ever call the police?" he asked. The old woman nodded. "I did. But nothing changed. Then a few days ago I saw the mother leave with a suitcase. She never came back." Keanu's stomach felt heavy. Lily had been alone for days. No food. No help. Just waiting. Waiting for a mother who would never return. Keanu turned toward his car, his mind racing. Lily had no parents now. No family. And if no one helped, she would be sent to foster care. That meant moving from house to house, never having a real home. Unless... Keanu took a deep breath. A thought entered his mind. A thought so big and so scary, but one he couldn't ignore. This wasn't just about saving Lily one time. This was about making sure she was never alone again. Keanu sat in his car, gripping the steering wheel. He stared at the hospital doors. He didn't know what to do next. Lily had no one. Her mother was gone. Her father? No one knew where he was. And the system, it would take her and place her in a home. Then another. And another. Until she became just another lost child. Unless... Keanu's hands tightened on the wheel. This thought wouldn't leave his mind. He got out of his car and walked back into the hospital. He knew exactly who he needed to talk to. Rachel Lawson, the social worker. She looked up when she saw him. She could tell he was serious. "Mr. Reeves?" she asked. Keanu took a deep breath. "I want to help," he said. Rachel nodded. "You already did. If you hadn't found her, she might not have survived." Keanu shook his head. "I don't mean just today." Rachel's expression changed. She closed the file in front of her. "What exactly are you saying?" she asked. Keanu swallowed hard. Then he finally said it. "I want to take care of her." Rachel leaned back. She studied him. "Mr. Reeves, do you understand what you're saying?" Keanu didn't blink. "I know she doesn't have anyone. I know the system won't give her what she needs. And I know that I..." He paused. His throat felt tight. "I don't want her to be alone again." Rachel sighed. "Keanu, you're an actor. You travel. You work all the time. Taking care of a child isn't just about wanting to help. It's about stability." Keanu nodded. "I know. I don't have all the answers. But I won't let her disappear into the system." Rachel was quiet for a long time. Then she finally spoke. "There's a process for this. If you're serious, we have to do this the right way." Keanu exhaled. "Then let's start." Later that evening, Keanu sat beside Lily's hospital bed. She was awake now. She looked better. Her cheeks had color again, but she was still tired. When she saw Keanu, she gave a small smile. "You came back." Keanu nodded. "I told you I would." Lily held her old, patched-up Hello Kitty backpack tightly. She hesitated. Then, in a very quiet voice, she asked, "What's going to happen to me?" Keanu felt a lump in his throat. He could have told her what the system would do, that they would find her a place to stay, that they would try to take care of her. But that wasn't enough. Instead, he reached for her hand. "You're not alone, kiddo," he said gently. "I'm going to make sure of that." Lily's eyes filled with tears. But this time they weren't sad tears. They were hopeful. The next few weeks were full of meetings, paperwork, and waiting. Keanu had to prove he could take care of Lily. He had to show that he could give her a stable home. The process wasn't easy. There were many questions, many rules. But Keanu didn't back down, because he had made a promise, and he wasn't going to break it. One morning, Keanu drove down the street slowly. He knew this street well now. And there she was, Lily. She was standing at the bus stop, smiling. Keanu pulled his car closer, watching her. She looked so different now. Not just healthier, not just stronger, but I'm happier. Her cheeks were no longer pale. Her arms and legs weren't thin anymore. She looked full of life. And instead of her old ripped backpack, she had a brand new bright pink Hello Kitty bag. But the biggest change? Her eyes. Before, her eyes had been filled with fear, uncertainty. Now they were filled with something else. Hope. Keanu smiled as he drove away. For the first time in a long time, he felt something he hadn't felt before. He had stepped into Lily's life by accident. A simple moment, a small wave, and yet it had changed everything. Now Lily had a safe home, a future, a second chance, and most of all, she would never be alone again. If you enjoyed this story, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and let me know what you think. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more exciting stories filled with adventure, mystery, and unforgettable moments. Your support means the world. It keeps these stories coming and the creativity flowing. Thanks for watching, and I can't wait to see you in the next video.